It was another miserable night at Moe's tavern. The clock ticked past midnight, and Moe Sislak, Springfield's grumpiest bartender, was hunched over the counter, wiping it down with a rag so filthy it left more grime than it cleaned. The air smelled of stale beer and regret, and the only sound was the faint buzz of a flickering neon sign outside. "Another day in paradise," Moe muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he glared at the empty stools. That's when the door creaked open and a stranger shuffled in, a tall, gaunt figure with sunken eyes and a crooked smile that stretched too wide for his face. "Give me a beer that never ends," the man rasped, tossing a coin that spun unnaturally in the air before landing on the counter. Moe rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure, pal. One bottomless brew coming up." He grabbed a dusty glass and poured from the tap, but the liquid that came out wasn't duff. It was black, thick and oily, bubbling like tar. The glass overflowed, spilling onto the counter, where it hissed and ate through the wood like acid. "What the?" Moe yelped, jumping back as the stranger cackled, a low, guttural sound that made the hairs on Moe's neck stand up. Before he could sling an insult, the floor beneath him shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed across the tiles, and with a deafening roar, the ground gave way. Moe plummeted, arms flailing, into a pitch-black abyss, his screams swallowed by the void. As he fell, a swarm of cockroaches with tiny glowing eyes buzzed around him, their wings whispering in unison. "You deserve this, Moe. You deserve this." After what felt like hours, he landed with a wet splat on a surface that wasn't quite solid. It was sticky, like gum melted under a summer sun, and it clung to his hands as he tried to stand. The air was heavy, reeking of sour beer and mold, a stench so thick it coated his tongue. "Where the hell am I?" he croaked, squinting into the dim, reddish haze. His legs sank into the gooey floor with every step, and panic clawed at his chest. Then, ahead, something glinted. A massive, cracked mirror, its frame twisted like gnarled roots, towering over him. Moe stumbled toward it, hoping for answers, but what he saw stopped him cold. The reflection wasn't his usual ugly mug. His face stared back, sure, but it was wrong. His skin began to split down the middle, peeling apart like a rotten fruit. From the gash, something emerged. Another Moe, a grotesque parody with bulging, bloodshot eyes and teeth that grew longer by the second, slicing through its own lips as it giggled maniacally. "Hey, look at me! I'm the real Moe!" it screeched, blood dribbling down its chin. Before he could process it, another figure clawed its way out of the mirror. A second mask, this one with a face covered in oozing, pulsating warts that popped one by one, spraying a yellow pus that sizzled when it hit Moe's skin. He screamed, swatting at the burning droplets, but the masks kept coming, each more hideous than the last. They surrounded him, a chorus of distorted Moes, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of mockery. "You're a failure, Moe." One howled, its tongue lolling out like a slug. "Nobody ever loved ya?" snarled another, its fingers elongating into claws that raked at his arms, tearing off strips of flesh. Moe swung his fists wildly, but the masks dodged with unnatural speed, their laughter echoing off invisible walls. The wart-covered one lunged, pinning him down, and smeared its rancid pus across his face. "Let's make you pretty like us!" It sneered as Moe thrashed, the acid eating into his cheeks. He kicked free and bolted, his heart pounding, only to skid to a halt as the mirror reappeared in front of him, blocking his path. He turned, but there it was again, behind him, beside him, everywhere. The masks swarmed closer, their hands groping for his skin, peeling it away to wear it like grotesque costumes. "Get away from me, you freaks," Moe roared, but his voice cracked into a sob. The mirror loomed larger, its surface rippling, and he realized there was no escape. This was his hell, a twisted reflection of every insult he'd ever hurled. At himself, every moment of self-loathing brought to life. The masks closed in, their cackling drowning out his screams, and Moe knew this was just the beginning. Moe staggered away from the mirror, his face stinging from the acidic pus and his arms raw where the masks had clawed at him. The sticky, gum-like floor sucked at his shoes with every step, and the air buzzed with the faint whispers of those cockroaches, now out of sight, but never out of earshot. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled through the reddish haze, desperate for anything that wasn't another reflection of his own twisted self. "I gotta get out of here," he muttered, wiping sweat or maybe blood from his brow. That's when he saw it, a faint glow ahead pulsing like a heartbeat, accompanied by the hum of something familiar. He squinted and limped closer, his heart lifting for a split second. It was a jukebox, just like the one in his tavern, scratched, dented, and glowing with a sickly neon light that flickered between green and purple. "Well, ain't that a sight for sore eyes?" Moe rasped, a flicker of hope cutting through. His dread. He fumbled in his pocket, found a grimy quarter, and slid it into the slot. The machine whirred to life, but instead of music, a low groan echoed from its speakers, followed by a trickle of dark red liquid that oozed from the edges like blood from a wound. Before Moe could back away, the jukebox shuddered violently, and its sides split open. Cables, black, rubbery, and writhing like snakes, shot out, coiling around his wrists and yanking him forward. "What the? Let go, you lousy hunk of junk!" Moe yelled, pulling against the grip, but the cables tightened, their ends sparking with electricity. The jukebox's front panel twisted into a grotesque mockery of a face, its buttons blinking, like eyes, and its coin slot stretching into a jagged grin. A distorted version of Sweet Home Alabama blared from the speakers, but the voice wasn't Lynyrd Skynyrd's. It was Barney's, slurred and dripping with venom, each note laced. With a guttural laugh, the cables jerked Moe into a forced dance, spinning him like a marionette as the music grew louder, pounding in his skull. "Dance, Moe, you miserable jerk!" the jukebox snarled, its voice a warped blend of metal and flesh. Then came the pain. The cables slithered up his arms and pierced his ears, burrowing inside with a wet, squelching sound. Moe screamed as they wormed into his brain, each note of the song stabbing like a rusty knife. His vision blurred, and blood trickled from his ears, staining his shirt as he begged, "Stop it! I can't take it!" But the jukebox only laughed, a grating mechanical cackle, and tightened its hold. "You never deserved friends, Moe, just a sad sack behind a bar," it taunted, and the cables began to pulse, merging with his flesh. His arms twitched as the rubber fused with his skin, turning his hands into grotesque clumps of wire and meat, sparking with every movement. Moe clawed at the cables, tearing chunks of his own skin in the process, but they grew back, thicker and blacker, rooting deeper into his body. The music sped up, a frenzied tempo that forced his legs to twist and spin until his knees cracked like dry twigs. His spine bent backward at an impossible angle, and he felt his ribs groan under the strain. "I'm gonna puke," he gasped, but the jukebox spun him faster, its grin widening as his body warped into a hybrid of man and machine. His chest heaving with wires that pulsed like veins, his eyes flickering with static. Finally, the song hit a screeching climax, and the cables snapped free, flinging Moe into a heap of rancid trash, empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and something slimy he didn't want to identify. He lay there, trembling, the echo of Barney's voice still ringing in his head as the jukebox dimmed, its glow fading to a dull hum. His arms twitched, still threaded with faint wires beneath the skin, and he knew it wasn't over. Dagging himself upright, Moe spat blood onto the ground and rasped, "I hate this place." But the darkness ahead swallowed his words, and he had no choice but to crawl onward, the jukebox's laughter lingering behind him. Moe crawled through the fetid darkness, his body a wreck from the jukebox's torment. Wires still twitched beneath his skin, sparking faintly, and his ears rang with the ghost of that warped Sweet Home Alabama. The sticky floor had given way to a cold, uneven surface that scraped his knees raw, and hunger gnawed at his gut like a living thing. "I'd kill for a pretzel," he rasped, his voice hoarse from screaming. As if answering his plea, a warm, savory scent wafted through, the air salty, greasy, and irresistible. He lifted his head, squinting through the gloom, and saw it. A long table draped in a stained cloth, piled high with food. Pretzels, peanuts, a glistening hamburger, everything he'd ever served at the tavern, only better. He stumbled to his feet, wires creaking in his joints, and lurched toward the banquet. "Finally something good in this dump," he muttered, snatching a pretzel. But as he bit down, the dough twisted in his mouth, sprouting tiny needle-sharp teeth. It wasn't a pretzel, it was a worm, wriggling and biting its way down his throat. Moe gagged, clawing at his neck, but the creature burrowed deeper, its teeth shredding his insides as he coughed up blood. Panicked, he grabbed a handful of peanuts, hoping to choke it down, only for them to blink open as eyes, pulsing veiny orbs that popped in his mouth, spraying a burning yellow slime that seared his tongue and blinded him momentarily. Reeling, he seized the hamburger, desperate for anything normal. The first bite was juicy, delicious, until he felt a sting on his back. He reached behind and found a gaping hole where flesh had been torn away. The burger was his own meat, minced and molded, still warm from his body. He retched, the half-chewed bite splattering onto the table, but it slithered back into place, intact and mocking. Before he could flee, shadowy figures emerged from the haze, Homer, Barney, and Lenny, their faces melting like wax, eyes drooping to their chins. "Hey, Moe, you always served us garbage," Homer gurgled, his mouth a-dripping. "More." They lurched forward, pinning him to a chair as Barney shoved a spoonful of writhing worms into his mouth. "Eat up, pal," Lenny cackled, his jaw unhinging to reveal a tongue studded with teeth. Moe thrashed, but their hands, soft and molten, held him fast. They force-fed him the banquet, each bite a new horror. Pretzel worms gnawing his stomach, eye peanuts bursting in his throat, and chunks of his own flesh clogging his windpipe. "You deserve this, Moe," they chanted, their voices blending into a wet, guttural roar. His belly swelled grotesquely, skin stretching until it split, leaking a mix of blood and slime. Just as he thought he'd burst, the table vanished, and the zombified trio dissolved into ash, leaving him sprawled on the cold ground, heaving and alone. The silence didn't last. The floor dropped away and Moe floated in a black void, weightless and disoriented. "Help!" he shouted, but his voice echoed back in a mocking falsetto. "Help! Help! Poor little Moe!" Shapes flickered in the distance, Marge's blue hair, Homer's bald dome, but as he reached for them, they crumbled to dust, their faces twisting into sneers before vanishing. His body began to stretch, limbs elongating like taffy, thin and endless. He screamed, but the sound stretched too, warping into a pitiful whine. Every inch of him burned with the ache of abandonment, a sensation he'd buried beneath years of bitterness now laid bare. The void pressed in, amplifying his isolation. The masks from the mirror, the jukebox taunts, the banquet's cruelty, all whispered in the dark a chorus of his failures. His form unraveled further, a thread of flesh and wire spiraling into infinity, yet he remained conscious, feeling every moment of loss. "I get it, I'm a nobody," he sobbed, but the void swallowed his words, leaving only silence. Moe Descent, stretched beyond recognition, floated on, trapped in an eternity of himself, with no one left to care.